Good afternoon. Welcome to another segment of my YouTube channel. It is my pleasure to have Dr. Forbes. Today we are going to talk primarily about the COVID-19 vaccines. There is a lot of information, a lot of misinformation as well about this vaccine, about the different vaccines that's available. And so I thought it'd be best that, we speak to a doctor. I've seen a lot of Dr. Forbes writings about the vaccine and very informed. And so I thought I would share this in a video format to educate the public about the various vaccines, particularly the Pfizer, the one that we in the Turks and Caicos Islands are taking. Dr. Forbes, please let us know, tell the viewers who you are.
Okay, thank you. Thank you for having me. My name is Vancelee Forbes. I am an internist and a nephrologist at the Turks and Caicos Islands Hospitals, InterHealth Canada. About 90% of my time is spent looking after patients with kidney disease, including persons on dialysis. But I also look after patients with internal medicine concerns, including looking after persons with COVID.
She's also my doctor, as I am. I'm also one of those patients that is on dialysis, so I see her pretty often. Dr. Forbes, we are going to get straight into the point. As I mentioned in introduction, we are going to talk primarily about the vaccine. There's a lot of concern about the vaccine. There's still a lot of people who do not want to take it, and of course that is their right. A lot of people are concerned. One concern that people have, when I speak to some folks, is that they feel that this vaccine will interfere with their DNA. Right. Based on your knowledge, tell us about that. Is there any truth to that?
Okay, so thank you. The short answer is no. So we know by now that the Pfizer-BioNTech vaccine is a mRNA vaccine, so messenger ribonucleic acid. But I will say mRNA for short because that's what everyone's familiar with. The mRNA is actually not something that is strange to us. And although this is a new platform for vaccines, scientists have been researching mRNA for over 20 years, looking at it as for cancer treatments as well as for vaccines. But the COVID pandemic was an opportunity for this platform to come on stream and to become mainstream. Also, the mRNA vaccine technology mimics normal human biology. So we're not introducing something that's foreign to the body. Our bodies make mRNA every day. It's a part of our normal day-to-day processes. It's how our DNA, which sits in the nucleus and acts as the brain of the body and the brain of the cell rather, passes messages to the rest of the cell where proteins are being made and other functions are being carried out. But that DNA, in order to get that message to the rest of the cell to tell it what to do, what proteins to make and when, it uses messenger RNA or mRNA. So on a daily basis, our DNA is communicating with the rest of our cell using messenger RNA or mRNA. So the vaccine technology is simply mimicking, and it's actually just taking one step out of this normal process. So it's bypassing the DNA. So the mRNA does not enter the nucleus where the DNA sits or resides, but the mRNA goes directly to our cells, into the cell where the proteins are being made. This is called the ribosomes. The mRNA goes directly to the ribosomes and instructs the ribosomes to create the spike protein. By now we all know what the spike protein is. Those are the protrusions that you see on the surface. There are many protrusions on the surface of the coronavirus. It's called SARS-CoV-2, but I would say coronavirus because that's what everyone is familiar with. And so the mRNA is not coding for the whole virus. It's only coding for the spike protein. And so when our bodies then make spike protein, as instructed by the mRNA, then spike protein is protruded from our cells, and our immune system recognizes it as foreign. Okay, this does not belong here. It's not aware that it belongs to the coronavirus, but it knows that it's foreign, and it starts to mount an immune response to it. So if in the future a person is actually exposed to the actual coronavirus, then our immune system recognizes it by recognizing the spike protein, and therefore it's already primed. Normally, the immune system takes about 7 to 10 days to be primed, but we know with COVID, so much damage can be done within that period of time, and so many people have, lost their lives. So the safest way to prime the immune system is through a vaccine, where we do not introduce the actual virus. It's just an mRNA given an instruction to produce the spike protein. It primes the immune system so that if in the future you are exposed to the virus, you're ready to take care of it.
Okay, so basically it sort of protects and builds up your immune system.
That's correct, yes. And it does not interfere with our DNA. So the mRNA does not enter the nucleus where the DNA sits. It does not interfere with our DNA. It does not change our DNA. So that's just a misunderstanding or misconception, but the mRNA does not alter our DNA.
And so, but it also does not guarantee you that you'll not get the COVID-19, because there are studies and cases with people fully vaccinated and they still got the COVID-19.
Right, and so that's a good point. So no vaccine is 100% so far effective in terms of in real life. So if you compare it with the flu vaccine, for example, that's up to 60% effective, yet people take it every year, particularly high-risk persons, to prevent the severe complications of flu, so the elderly and so forth. The COVID vaccine, particularly the Pfizer mRNA vaccine, from the initial studies, we know that it's about 95% effective. That is, about 5% of persons who take the vaccine will still get COVID. However, despite those persons still getting COVID, we know that the vaccine reduces the risk of severe COVID, the risk of hospitalizations, and the risk of dying. So even though there's a tiny chance, 5% chance of persons getting COVID once fully vaccinated, at least we know that the symptoms are mild. So you're turning a deadly disease such as COVID into something more manageable, something like the common cold, which is very common. Every year people get it, but people are not dying from it, and we're not shutting down economies as a result of it.
That's a good point you raised, because I think what's happening was that there are messages out there that if you are fully vaccinated, you're not going to get COVID.
Right.
And so people will say, well, other people are getting it, so I'm not going to take it. But as you say, it's a small percentage.
It's a small percentage. And now we also have, data showing that the vaccine does protect against infection, meaning it does protect the majority of people from getting COVID. The initial studies only looked at getting symptomatic infection. So when they tested the initial study population, if a person developed symptoms, then they tested them for COVID. So the scientists could only report that the vaccine protected you against the disease. But, now we have more studies from Israel, from the UK, and from the CDC that it not only protects you from symptomatic COVID, but also asymptomatic COVID, and therefore it protects against transmission.
Yeah, that is great news.
Yes.
Now, in terms of the vaccine, right? I know I took it. Yes. It took me a while to agree to do it. Because I was thinking, I'm not going to take this thing, because I also heard all this, information out there. But because of my underlying condition that I had, and after speaking with you, how it builds up the immune system, I decided, you know what, let me take it, and I'm just going to put the rest in the hands of God. Now, the vaccine, do you know how long the vaccine will last for? Because I know with the flu, I believe it's every year.
Right.
Will this be for 6 months, a year? Do you have any information about that?
At this point in time, we do not know. Those tests are ongoing, but we do know that the vaccine lasts, or that the protection lasts for at least 6 months. So we do now have 6-month data.
At minimum.
At minimum, and we know that the protection is maintained at least 6 months. And so we will continue to study and follow persons who've been vaccinated to see how long that protection lasts. So right now we don't know for sure.
There's some individuals who are taking another vaccine, and in the Bahamas, I've seen stories where a person saying that they experience blood clots.
Right.
But I know we got 300 of that in this last batch from the UK,
Right.
and the minister mentioned that they got that one because there are people who have allergies,
Right.
and they do not recommend the Pfizer for that, for the person with allergies, so they got this one. Anything on the blood clot? Is it a high percentage of people getting blood clot from this other vaccine?
Right. So no, it's not a high percentage. Based on data coming out of the UK, where over 20 million persons received this vaccine, they calculated the rate to be 4 per million. So it is very rare. However, it tended to be more common in the younger persons. And so, you know, the UK and the European bodies are noticing, and they are saying that there is certainly a possibility that the vaccine is associated with an increased risk of blood clots. One of the bodies in the UK has recommended using an alternative vaccine or avoiding this vaccine in young people under the age of 30, for example. I guess at the end of the day, whether it's a vaccine or any treatment, you have to weigh up the risk versus benefit analysis. The treatment or the prevention, or the preventative intervention cannot be worse than the disease you're trying to prevent. And we know that the younger people tend to fare better with COVID. So the risk versus benefit balance then changes a bit when you have a younger person who's at lower risk of dying from COVID, but then their risk for getting a blood clot then starts to outweigh the risk of getting COVID.
Yeah.
Whereas for the older folks who had a higher risk of dying from COVID, then their risk-benefit ratio is much different.
Now, when someone, takes the vaccine, for the Pfizer,
Yeah.
we had to take 2 dosage.
Right.
Now, the first time, my first dosage, I experienced a little bit like a fever, just for a day or 2. And then when I took the second dosage, I was getting like cold chills. Have you heard of any other cases that people experience anything other than the cold chills, the flu, anything?
Within Turks and Caicos?
In Turks and Caicos.
So those are pretty much the most common symptoms reported, not only in Turks and Caicos, but worldwide, as well as in the study. So flu-like symptoms, so fever, chills, fatigue, muscle aches and pains. Some people had headaches, nausea, occasional vomiting. But those are pretty much the most common symptoms. We haven't had any confirmed severe reactions as yet.
So what do you say to those individuals who said they've never taken the flu vaccine,
Right.
and what they've done, they monitor what they eat,
Right.
so they eat very healthy, and they believe that the food they eat will help them to develop a good immune system,
Right.
and so there's no need for them to take the vaccine.
Right.
What do you say about that?
Okay, thank you, and that's an important question. So first of all, us having a healthy lifestyle, healthy diets, trying to build up our immune system by natural means is always important. And that was important before COVID, and it will be important after COVID. However, when I think about COVID, you have to look at 2 sides of the story. For me, you have to look at my individual protection, or the persons whoever that is, you consider, what is this vaccine going to do for me?
Mhm.
And then the other question is, what is this vaccine going to do for those around me and for my community, for my country? So I consider myself young still,
Yes.
and I consider myself healthy, so I assume that my risk, or I hope that my risk of COVID would be low. However, I had to think outside of myself. I do look after a vulnerable group of patients. I have elderly parents, and I have other elderly and vulnerable persons in the community that I'm in regular contact with. So although the risk to me is low, if I was to get COVID and then transmit it to someone else, then I could be putting them at risk. So I had to be more community minded. And then the other consideration is, what about the country? What about the economy? So it's one thing to say, well, I'll be okay. But if a lot of people, the majority of people who consider themselves to be young and healthy, decide, well, we're not going to take the vaccines, then we're not going to build up the herd immunity. And if we don't get the herd immunity, then we don't really get the population protection that we need, and we don't really get out of the pandemic. So we're now moving beyond my individual health concerns, but what about getting to the end of this pandemic and getting back to normal? The way to get back to normal really is through herd immunity, where we can safely say we can get back to our normal lives, social gathering, without masks. The majority of people, the majority of people are vaccinated. You're hearing 70 to 80%. No one knows for sure. But once we get to that herd immunity, then we can safely get back to our normal lives, because the risk then of transmission of COVID and the risk to the vulnerable individuals goes down significantly. So it's not just about your personal health, you're also thinking about the wider community.
Okay. What is herd community? What do you mean by that?
Right. So that's a good question. So herd immunity, I'll look at an analogy. So if there are 10 people within a gym setting, right?
Mhm.
So a lot of people went to the gym before all of the lockdowns, and not many are comfortable going back. But if there were 10 people in a gym setting and none of them were immune to the virus, if one person came into the gym in that enclosed environment who had COVID, and maybe they didn't know because they didn't have any symptoms, and we know that we have a lot of asymptomatic COVID, that one person could infect the rest. They could infect the 9, okay? And then those 9 go out to their homes, to their workplaces, places of worship, wherever they go, and infect others. So the virus spreads. But let's say 8 out of the 10 are vaccinated, so they have immunity. But there's probably one there who doesn't have their immunity. But the fact that the majority of people in that group are vaccinated, you are able to stem the spread of that virus, where the one who may not be vaccinated is actually shielded by the rest because they're vaccinated. And so it's like if there's a chain reaction and you're vaccinated, the chain stops with you, the reaction stops with you. So you're not passing that on. So the immunity of the majority then protects the rest.
Gotcha. And so you believe that once we reach that herd immunity,
Yes,
it is possible that we may have to wear masks.
that's correct.
Is that right?
Yes.
So there's perhaps that's why the government, I guess, is pushing people or encouraging people to become vaccinated.
That's correct.
Oh.
So we can get back to normal, fully open our economy, because even right now we're not fully open, are we?
No.
So fully open our economy, get back to our social gatherings and our celebrations and so forth, really getting back to life as normal and are getting the kids back to school fully, right?
Yes.
Without fear of them bringing home the virus.
Okay, I want to thank you again for this opportunity. It's been very informative, and I've certainly learned a lot, and I'm quite sure the viewers have. Do you have any closing remarks, or you want to add some points that we did not raise earlier?
Okay. So thank you for this opportunity to speak, to share about the COVID-19 vaccine, particularly the mRNA vaccine. I just wanted to reiterate that the mRNA vaccine, although it's a new technology, we do have a lot of information about it. We've been researching it for more than 20 years. It is a safe vaccine. There are a lot of concerns out there, for example, about infertility and so forth. There is no evidence, okay, that the mRNA vaccines cause infertility. What we know is that during the studies, women who got the vaccine got pregnant and had normal pregnancies, normal deliveries, and healthy babies, for example. And with regards to the man, there's no biological process by which the mRNA is likely to interfere with their, their sexual organs, for example, or their sexual function, whereas we know that COVID actually can. And so the vaccine is safer than COVID. Take your chances with the vaccine. The vaccines are safe. They're very effective. They do prevent severe disease. They do prevent people from dying. And we also now know that they do prevent infection and therefore transmission. So the best way to get back to normal is through herd immunity. And the best way to get herd immunity, the safest way to get herd immunity, is through widespread vaccination.
Well, thank you for listening to this video. Please remember to subscribe to my YouTube channel. I hope that you are being better informed about the pros, the advantages of taking the vaccine. And obviously, at the end of the day, it is your choice whether or not you want to take the vaccine. But I think it's best that we educate the public, and once the awareness is brought to the public, then they can make an informed decision. No one should be forced, obviously, to take the vaccine, especially without knowledge. So Dr. Forbes has provided us a wealth of information, and now that you have this information, you can then decide whether or not you want to take the vaccine. Have a wonderful day, and thanks again for watching this channel.